Hi, welcome back to Undefined with Ami or Amiram or whatever you want to call it. I have a very, very, very special guest today. He is the Woody Allen of violin. He is the man behind the strings. One of the most eclectic, one of the most interesting, unique violinists, musicians, and artists here in Israel today. Daniel Hoffman, welcome.
Well, thank you.
I am very, very happy to have you on my show. Not only because we're good friends, but also because you're basically, you've blown my mind for a lot of years with your violin playing. You've changed completely the direction my second album was going in, and you basically are doing amazing things with this thing.
It's a little box, yeah. It's got
a little box with a couple of
with a
strings
couple of wires on it.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be here. And that's quite an introduction.
Well, you know, I thought, you know, the Woody Allen and violin was kind of like coin that phrase. What do you think of it?
We'll table it, you know.
Table it, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get back to it.
We'll get back to it. I always felt like you have whatever going on the outside, but on the inside, I feel like a Woody Allen movie. So that's basically my reference to Woody Allen. But jokes aside, you've been busy playing a lot lately. You had an interesting show last night. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
Well, I play with a group called Harel Shachal and the Ottomanim, which plays a lot of traditional Turkish music, but also a lot of fusiony stuff, kind of Mediterranean mix with Middle Eastern music and Jewish influences and Turkish influences, and all based on the maqam system, which is the system of scales that are used in the Middle East, which include quarter tones, notes between the keys of a piano, say.
And non-musicians have no idea what you just said.
That's okay.
That's okay. That's part of the
That's right.
interesting conversation of basically music being a language, because this is actually a language that transcends borders and politics, because this is something that's used universally basically all over the Middle East, right?
Yeah, that's right. So a violin, because it doesn't have any frets, can play any note. You can play these microtonal notes, and these notes in between the notes of a piano. And in the Arab world, those notes are a little lower usually. In the Turkish world, they're usually a little higher. But that's not so important, because usually for someone with Western ears, it just sounds out of tune. And if it sounds out of tune, then it's right.
All right. Okay, that's good. So you had a show last night. Basically, you're playing with this band every Monday night?
Yeah, we're almost every Monday night at Shafa Bar in Yafo, which is a lot of fun. We're there for 5 years now, almost every Monday, except for some short breaks.
Nice.
Here and there, either for vacations or complaints from the neighbors. And last night, we apparently had some special guests in the house.
What's funny about it is, I'm not going to say who the guests were, but you had no idea who these guests were, because you're not that interested in just popular music, Western music, like whatever's on MTV and stuff like that. It doesn't actually.
I'm not a consumer of pop music and commercial music so much. I love it very much. I listen to it all the time, but I'm not a big consumer. So there's a lot of things out there that I have no clue about.
And one of those things were actually Radiohead.
Radiohead, yeah.
Who are playing
who I had heard of, and of course I've been following them in the news for various reasons. And I'm sure I've heard some of their music, but I don't know what they look like. I mean, I have no idea.
And they're sitting at a table right in front of you guys as you're playing the concert yesterday.
Right.
And you found out from one of your band members saying, "Hey,
stupid.
This is Radiohead.
Do you know who they are?"
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, that's Radiohead. Okay."
Nice. People are paying like hundreds and hundreds of shekels to come and watch them perform tomorrow. And they actually came to watch you perform.
Yeah, which is great. I think they came because Ariel Cassis, who is our kanun player, plays with Dudu Tassa, who, by the way, was also there last night. And they have been touring around with Radiohead in their U.S. tour. Nice. And Dudu Tassa is going to play with them also tomorrow at Park Yarkon.
For those who don't know who Dudu Tassa is, he's, in my opinion, one of Israel's most interesting musicians. He is now on tour with Radiohead, and I will try to get him on the show sometime. So, yeah. So they show up, and you guys are playing basically your set, and you send me a text message and a message, okay, we're playing for Radiohead.
That was after the break. We were on a break, and that's when I found out, we're playing for Radiohead, and I thought you'd appreciate it.
I definitely did. I definitely did. I mean, I drove, it's maybe 13 years ago now, but I drove at least 2,000 kilometers to see them one time. So,
wow.
Yeah, so it's definitely one of the bands that I appreciate out there. And I think you will as well if you get into their music. They have a wide range of eclectic sounds and yeah, just unorthodox ways of approaching music, which I think you will appreciate. Let's talk a little bit more about this band, the Ottomans. So basically, you guys have now played in Yafo, but you've also played some festivals, right?
We played various concerts around Israel, and last week we played at a festival in southern France.
Oh, nice.
Called the Nuit du Sud Festival.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Your French is...
My French, it's a work in progress.
Work in progress, yeah.
And it was very successful and very fun. And it's a lot of the music we play are compositions by Harel Shachal, who's a really talented clarinet player and composer.
Nice.
And everybody in the band is amazing.
Yeah, I've heard you guys, and I have to say it's really a collection of amazing musicians.
Yeah, two percussionists, Roy Friedman and Nur Bar-Goren, Yaniv Teichman on oud, Ariel Cassis on kanun, and Harel.
I think we should actually hear them. Maybe we could just start off with a couple of minutes of the Ottomans. Let's see, get people an idea of what you're doing. little
Harel
bit of
Shachal and the Ottomanim, the
Nice.
Ottomans.
very, very nice. So how did you get into this whole like world music? Because you're not from here. You were born in
California,
California, grew up
Orange
in
County, California.
Orange County.
Basically a surfer.
Nice. And you were also playing guitar in your early
Yeah,
days, right?
I started out playing violin when I was 7,
Okay.
and liked it for a couple of years, and then I kept playing it under threat for many more years. And then when I was about 12, I started taking up the guitar and started playing rock and roll and played in rock bands in high school. And eventually I got serious about the violin. I went to a conservatory and I studied at a classical conservatory called the Manhattan School of Music.
Mhm.
And I graduated from there. But even before I graduated, I realized I was in the wrong place. And I was really trying to fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing.
Mhm.
And not too long after I graduated, I heard klezmer music performed live by a band in Berkeley, California called the Klezmorim.
Okay.
And I just like immediately fell in love. And then I went out and bought a CD, and I heard this one recording of a piece called Beim Reben Suda at the rabbi's table, which was played by like a very early iteration of the band.
Mhm.
And it was out of tune, and it was crazy, and the rhythm was off kilter, and I was like, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. And from then on, I just started trying to learn more about the style, listen to old recordings. I got as deep as I could into it. I started klezmer bands.
Before, like for those that don't know, a klezmer band is a band that plays music from.
Klezmer is the instrumental folk music of Jews from Eastern Europe.
Okay.
It's actually a pretty specific area. It's really the area around, it used to be called Bessarabia, Eastern Romania, parts of Ukraine. It's a small part of, that's where most of the repertoire we have now comes from.
Okay.
Not all, but a good deal of it.
But I can draw this back a bit because we met. I remember basically our daughters were in the same kindergarten,
Mhm.
and we talked. And I was working on my second album, and you invited me to one of your shows, and I remember I saw it, and it was basically the treatment of a violin like I hadn't seen before, and I invited you to come and do a couple of notes on my album, and not expecting that it would kind of change the direction of the whole
Mhm.
thing. I mean, you and Michael Feigenbaum were two. Michael Feigenbaum, a good friend of mine that plays, he does beatbox and plays percussion. Together, you kind of threw that whole thing for a loop, and I remember just thinking that. You were playing the violin almost like a guitar at certain times. You know,
Mhm.
it was
I
something
did. I
that's
definitely
really
learned a few
interesting.
things from my guitar days
Mhm.
that I apply in the violin. But actually, another thing I learned is after I first started playing klezmer, I realized that the violin it was hard to compete in a klezmer band with a drummer and a clarinet player and sometimes electric bass. It was really loud.
Mhm.
It was difficult to amplify the violin properly. Actually, at that time, the technology for amplifying a violin with a pickup wasn't that great. So I started a band that was just violin, cello, and Middle Eastern percussion.
Nice.
And that was based on my experiences coming here to Israel several times and hearing Arab music and hearing Mizrahi music and wanting to somehow put klezmer melodies together with Middle Eastern rhythms. And so that was the beginning of this band called Davka. Now in Davka, because there was only a cello and a violin and percussion, I had to take on the role of a accompanist.
Mhm.
I had to play chords on the violin. So I sort of have to come up with all these techniques. And I spent a lot of time playing with a fantastic percussionist and learning how to play more groove music on the violin and learning all sorts of ways to accompany a cello, which is actually a lower instrument.
Yeah.
So I did get some of my rhythmic sense from many years playing in Davka, and coincidentally, both of the other musicians had studied Indian music extensively.
Oh wow.
And Indian music is the most sophisticated music for rhythm. It is the most complicated, developed, amazing thing you've ever heard.
Wow.
The kind of things they do. So some of that crept into Davka as well, and I learned things from that experience as well.
So, I mean, we're going to go further into that as we go along. I kind of want to give an example. We prepared a song from that, I think it was actually the first song that you played on, called Making a Mistake. We're going to do a little version of it now, where you kind of, this is where this rhythmical mix of rhythmic violin that almost sounded like a guitar came in, and it totally surprised me because I never heard a violin be played like that. So what do you say before we keep going into this world of violin depth, maybe that we do one of those songs?
Sure.
Sure. So just going to arrange this for a second.
Just happen to have a violin here.
Just happen to have a violin. I just happen to have a guitar. So this song is called Making a Mistake. Let's try to do a good version of it here.
I'm willing.
And let's see if we're willing and able. So, you ready? When the devil's in your head, outnumbered angels on your shoulder, when with every step you take, you can feel you're getting colder, and I am making a mistake. I'm a mistake. Ooh, again. Making a mistake again. Can you lend me a quarter, man? 'Cause I'm stuck in this laundry machine, and it's spinning so hard, yeah, it's spinning so mean. And I try, 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 and I try to leave. Just open the door and leave. So I am making a mistake. And I am making a mistake, making a mistake. Making a mistake. Thank you. That's fun. We haven't played together in some time now.
Too long.
Too long. Hey, hold on a second. Let's me rearrange that and bring this one up. It's live, guys. Well, almost live. Almost live. So that song, we dropped it down, dropped the D down, made it a drop C now for this, because my voice is getting lower. I'm getting older. That doesn't happen to violin. They just become brighter and brighter.
You can always retune them.
Exactly. I'm looking for the button. So that was basically just a straightforward blues, you know, like 2 chords going back and forth. But yeah, like your research, basically violin research, has taken you far and wide. You've gone. Let's talk a little bit about how you're.
Right. Well, getting into klezmer sort of started the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people study classical music, and it's kind of a closed world. And as soon as I stepped out of that world in a serious way and started getting deep into a different style, it kind of opened my mind up. And that's when on my trips here, I started hearing Arabic music and started getting interested in that. But I didn't really get turned on to Middle Eastern music until I heard, I went to a music camp in the Redwoods in California called Middle Eastern Music and Dance Camp. Mm-hmm. And I got to sit next to a violinist from Lebanon named George Lamam. And late at night, everyone would sit around the fire and play, and it was all acoustic, of course. It was like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And this is the first time I heard somebody play a taksim on the violin, which is is the style of Middle Eastern improvisation, mm-hmm. which is also very sophisticated. It's a different way of improvising than jazz.
Okay.
It's got its own rules and aesthetics and everything. And the first time I heard that, I was completely blown away. And that was also a turning point in my life. It was the first time, because before, most of the Middle Eastern music I'd heard was like popular music with drum machines and not that interesting. Okay. But the first time I heard the more classic version of it, because there's a classical tradition in Arabic music and Turkish music. It's
surprising. I heard that the conservatory in Egypt, basically it takes 7 years to come out with some sort of degree in music. It's really complicated. A lot more complicated than a lot of people think.
And you can actually get a degree in Eastern music from the Jerusalem Academy of Music as well.
Okay.
So that started me on this journey, and not too long after that I took a trip to Morocco, partly because I heard music from Marrakesh. I heard the folk music of Marrakesh, in which they play a viola. Of course they play it upside down like this. Mm-hmm. It's not upside down for them. Mostly the viola sort of copies what the singer's doing. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple folk style of playing. But I went there, and pretty soon after I got there, of course, I couldn't resist drinking the orange juice on the street, so I got sick. So I checked into a nicer hotel, nicer meaning like, $20 a night.
So the traveling musician's budget.
Yeah. And at this hotel, they had a folklore show, is what they called it. Mm-hmm. And in this folklore show, there was a small ensemble playing the classical music of North Africa, which is called music andalus, or Andalusian music, mm-hmm. which is based on poetic forms that came from the golden era of Spain. And when all the Muslims and Jews were kicked out, that style moved to North Africa. And it's been preserved there without a lot of changes since. But one of the things they use is a violin. Okay. And so the violin has become a very important instrument in Andalusian music.
So that basically happened. So all the Jews and Muslims were kicked out in 1492, if I think, like Inquisition times.
Muslims were 10 years later, I believe.
Yeah. So this is we're talking about more than 500, 600 years of tradition.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous. It's the vocal part of it is the most important part. Mm-hmm. But that sort of got me thinking, and then I started checking out all the other places in the world that were using the violin. And the fascinating thing about the violin is that wherever you go in the world where they're using it in the traditional music, it sounds so completely different. It's just like a different instrument entirely. Yeah. In other places in the world, they tune it a little differently, but it's exactly the same instrument. This is a instrument that for almost 500 years, pretty much since 1535, has not changed in any essential way. The angle of the strings has changed to make it a little louder. The angle of the fingerboard has been changed slightly, but the body of the instrument and the concept and the technology has not changed in 500 years.
Wow.
And it's really this amazing technological achievement that they came up in Cremona, Italy. And basically it hasn't...
aliens came down.
It's like that, you know. But the violin, you know, a violin, there's a word that's actually really interesting, which is a fiddle. Because fiddle is a word that in various places in the world meant any stringed instrument that used a bow.
Okay.
So the violin was just an improvement on that concept. And there's all kinds of stringed instruments that use bows all over the world. The violin, something about the violin really caught on. And now you can hear it in the classical music of India. It's very important in South India, especially Iran. It's very important. Sometimes it replaces a traditional instrument, and sometimes it's played alongside a similar traditional instrument. All over the Arab world, it's a very important instrument. Turkey, Greece, Hungary, the Balkans, I could go on and on.
When did the violin arrive in, let's say, India? Did it come
probably
with like
came
the
with the
British?
British. Probably came with the British in the last 150 years. So
Okay.
I'm not exactly
so it's not,
sure.
so the tradition is there, it's deep, but it's
Yeah.
not. It's not like a 500-year-old
But-
tradition like in Morocco.
Yeah, but it's interesting that the violin seems, you know, because it's small and you can carry it around, you can put it in your rucksack if you're a sailor, you know, it showed up all over the world, and that may have had a lot to do with the British actually, because they were, you know, imperializing everywhere.
Largest land empire ever.
And so the violin sort of spread all over the world, and it was welcomed into all these traditional cultures because we don't have frets. You know, I don't have to just play a Western scale. I can play whatever note I want, not just. Right, that's a major scale. I can play any note. I can slide around. You can do all sorts of things that you can only do otherwise with your voice.
Yeah.
And a really important part of traditional music and folk music around the world comes from the vocal tradition. And all that is related to the language of the area. There's all this music in the language, which you can hear in the instrumental music.
So you basically went, and I think this is, we're going to talk a bit about a project that you're doing that I think is amazing, and it's called Violin Around the World. So basically, explain a little bit what you're doing there.
Well, the idea is for a documentary TV series about how the violin is used all over the world. And the catch, or the drama, is that in each episode I have a week to try to learn the style. I go to whatever country I'm going to, and I have 1 week to study with a master of the style, and then at the end to perform with him or her in concert. So it's like musical extreme sports.
Nice. And if you're a musician, you know how difficult it is to actually put yourself into a style that you haven't played before.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's impossible.
It's impossible.
It's complete. It's like, come
But
on,
you
how
did
long does
a-
it take to learn Chinese? Forget about it.
It's the language.
Your
It's
whole
exact-
life.
But you did a wonderful job in the so we have an episode that we're going to show, or
Well,
like a trailer.
Yeah, it's a trailer for the first episode. The first episode is shot in Ireland, in County Clare, with a fiddler named James Kelly, who comes from a really old Irish fiddling family. And so I filmed the first episode, and I'm really close to having it finished and hopefully put on American public television.
Nice. So maybe we should see the trailer. Watch the trailer. I think it's for me. It's really one of it's an amazing project. I really hope that it grows and expands. So
Thank you.
let's watch that trailer.
I've come to Ireland to do what everyone tells me is impossible. Learn to play Irish fiddle in 1 week and then perform on stage with James Kelly, one of Ireland's greatest fiddlers. Hey, James.
How are you?
Wow, great to meet you.
How are you?
1 week. Was this even remotely possible?
We can definitely do that in about 3 years.
I grew up in Southern California, and when I wasn't surfing or playing ice hockey, studied classical violin from the age of 7. I switched to guitar at the age of 12 because it became clear to me that girls like guitarists better. But eventually returned to the violin and graduated from the Manhattan School of Music. But for me, music had always been about connecting with people and finding my own musical voice.
And I'm going
When I left the conservatory, my search continued. I rediscovered the music of my grandparents, klezmer music. I listened to old recordings, got deeper into the style, and started a few klezmer bands. Traditional, and not so much. Years ago, on a trip to Morocco, I heard the violin played in a completely different way. I found a teacher and studied with him for 3 weeks. What I learned was not only a new musical style, I learned that my violin is a kind of passport. In this documentary series, Violin Around the World, I'll be traveling to a new region in each episode and taking violin lessons with the masters.
You're using a lot more bow. I want you to do this.
But is it possible to learn a new style in just 1 week?
Now, hang on a second. Now that's back to heavy on the first one again.
And perform on stage with one of these violin legends? It seemed like a good idea at first, but it became increasingly scary as the week continued.
Shut the brain up, squelch the ego, and let the soul take over. If you want to be an Irish musician and play Irish music, you have to get your soul ground down a little bit.
Then I had a third lesson with James, and that was a few hours ago. Now I'm going to play you one of the tunes that I've been learning with James. And it's supposed to sound Irish somehow. That's my challenge. I'm going to sit in with you and Artie on guitar, and
Right.
somehow I'm not going to make a fool of myself.
I'm bringing a brown paper bag for you.
The week was over. It was time to get on stage.
Daniel Hoffman.
That poet guy, the Irish poet guy, he amazes me. I mean, he has some sentences that it really gives you goosebumps. Like
Padre Rita, yeah, he's amazing. He's a musician, and he doesn't like to call himself a philosopher, but he is.
Yeah. How could people support this project if they wanted to kind of, I don't know, donate money or I saw the Violin Around the World. Do you have like
Yeah, I have
Patreon?
I have a website. Of course, you can always go there and donate money through PayPal. And just get in touch with me and let me know you're interested, so that when it's finished, you'll know how you can see the first episode, which I'm hoping will be in the next few months.
So everybody go into violinaroundtheworld.com and support Daniel here. I think it's definitely a project that is worth supporting. It has to come out and see the light of day and be spread. The funny part about this is I'm not a violin nerd. Like, you're definitely what you would call a violin nerd.
Yeah.
And the strongest sense of the word. But I've always appreciated the violin. Like, I saw another change in my musical journey was watching this Central Park concert from Dave Matthews Band. And they have no electric guitars, and I was really into electric guitars at the time. And you have a violin, and you have a saxophone, and there's just the power of that thing. And I saw also you in the Violin Around the World, you have the American folk music, which is just amazing, the bluegrass and the country music, that the way they play the violin there. So I think it's something that kind of transcends the nerdiness of the instrument. I think this it can really speak to a lot of people.
No, I hear that from a lot of people. You know, there's something about the violin that really touches people in a really deep way, and I think part of that is how it sounds so much like the human voice, but it does things that a human voice can't ever do.
Yeah. I think as well, but on the other hand, it also has this stigma from classical music, where it's such a hard instrument to play, it's such a demanding instrument, but you're actually showing a lot more playful approach to playing that instrument, which I think is I find that fascinating.
Well, most of us start playing violin and we start playing classical music, and more than half of us get traumatized in one way or another and stop playing. And one of the things that I want to get across in this Violin Around the World series, and by the way, I also have a Facebook page called Violin Around the World, where I feature violinists from all over every day. I put another link to a violinist that plays in a different way.
Oh, nice.
Is that there's so many ways to play the violin, you know. There's the Western classical way, which is great. It's amazing. There's the Indian way, where they're sitting, you know, they stick it in the right foot. There's, you know, the country fiddlers often play like this, and Morocco they play like this. There's been a couple of weird variations on all of these, you know.
This is you pulled out a different instrument here.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this thing.
This is a 8-string violin. It's made by Edward Hagen from New Mexico, who has who calls his company the 4F Company. Fine Fiddles by the Flying Farmer.
Nice.
This is an amazing man. This is a guy who builds everything. He built his own plane.
Wow.
That he flies around in. He built his own tractor. He's a farmer. He built his own house, and he builds instruments. He builds regular violins and mandolins. He also builds variations and bizarre variations on violins and mandolins in bizarre shapes. But here he came up with a violin that has double strings. So that makes 8. Now I took that idea and I changed it to be something more like a 12-string guitar, where the strings are in octaves. So you have a G and a high G, and a D and a high D, an A and a high A. Don't ask me how I'm doing that. And then 2 E's, because if you had a note that high, it wouldn't be a note, it would just be called punishment. Right? So this is from a concept from Ottoman music from many years ago called çifteteli, which means double string. It's also it became the name of a rhythm as well, and that's what most people know that word as. So this is used a lot in Ottoman music and Greek and Turkish music, but not this instrument. This is kind of an American creation from the mind of Edward Hagen.
Nice.
Really, you know, a unique person in the world.
So let's try to hear something. We're going to do something that has no connection to anything of what you said. Now we're going to do a whole different musical style. Tell us a little bit about this piece that we're. I moved the microphone. Tell us a bit about this piece that I'm going to try not to mess up, and it's called a doina.
A doina, yeah, it's a doina that I wrote. A doina is non-metric. In other words, there's no rhythm. Sort of cadenza-like composition that originated in Romania, and I'm not exactly sure. I believe there's about 7 styles of Romanian doinas, and one of them is the Jewish doina.
Okay.
And I learned as many of these Jewish doinas as I could. There's the Jewish violin style started disappearing in the 20s and 30s in Eastern Europe for the same reason that I started Davka, that you couldn't hear the thing above all the military instruments that started showing up, like drums and trombones and trumpets and things. So I'm going to play you a doina that I composed,
All right.
which is imaginatively entitled the Hoffman G minor doina.
That's that's a very creative title.
And I'm going to play it on this 8-string fiddle. So
All right,
hope
so
you like it.
I think should I move this mic here to the side so it doesn't catch the guitar? And
Yeah, you can start.
more listen to.
Go ahead. Yeah, very nice.
I'm just happy I didn't mess that up for you. That was super nice. So explain a little bit what you did there, because it was it's very rubato, like
Yeah,
you said,
the
no
whole thing is-
time,
Right.
and
It's something like a prayer, you know. Sometimes called a shepherd's lament.
oh, nice. So
When you're sitting out there with your goats in the hills and no one's around, it's just you and nature, this might be something that might come out.
wow, wow. It's funny because we're playing this, we're doing this like little performances here, and then we sit down, we have to talk about it, and you're still in the performance sort of. That's something I gotta work on. You know, this is basically my third show or fourth show.
You're doing great.
It's fun. It's definitely fun to be able to ask questions and give a little platform. So the doina, so this like Eastern European Romanian style of music is basically is so unique in a way. What else could you play with this?
You can play all sorts of Middle Eastern music.
Okay. Do you have any like?
I can play what would probably be the great grandfather of the doina,
Okay.
which I mentioned earlier is called a taksim.
Could you just give us a short
I could. Taksim is the either Turkish or Arabic improvisational tradition, and I could certainly play something for you. Now in the doina, what I play in the doina is actually something that's composed. So it's something that filtered down as it went up through the Balkans and arrived in Romania from Turkey. Really, the origins of that doina come from Turkey.
Okay.
Turned into this doina with chord changes. Now, you don't have chord changes in Middle Eastern music, in traditional Middle Eastern music. You don't have chords.
All right.
You don't have harmony. You have melody and rhythm
It's
and
all
texture.
unison, basically.
Yeah, I mean in the old style. Today you hear all sorts of harmonies in Middle Eastern music,
Yeah.
but that's a result of Western influence.
So,
Anyway, I'm going to play you a little taksim,
all right,
a little Hijaz taksim.
go for it. absolutely. Oh, we got some feedback. See, even the studio was impressed. So, yeah, I kind of put you on the spot there, but it's amazing how alive this instrument can be. It's just like it's so organic in a way.
Yeah, well, it's all, it's just natural. Well, this instrument, it's made from a strange kind of wood that you don't normally see on violins. It's called zebra wood.
Okay.
Which you can see the stripes on it. Really gorgeous on the back and the sides. And also the neck is all made of this zebra wood, which is a pretty hard wood. That's not usually what's used for a violin. Because this violin has such a tremendous amount of pressure on the bridge. It's not just double because of 8 strings, because the added strings that I'm using are octave higher.
Okay.
So it's more like 150% more pressure. I can't even guess, but so it had to be built a little stronger than a normal violin.
So what other travels did you do? You went to Morocco. Where else? And then to Ireland.
Well, it's Morocco. When I finished the first episode, Morocco is the place I want to go to next, actually.
All right.
Because in a way, that's where this whole idea got started. That's where the idea was sort of planted in my brain.
But what made you choose Ireland as your first destination?
Ireland, because Ireland, speaking of the British, at one point the British Navy was half Irish.
Okay.
So the Irish really, there's this huge Irish diaspora. Right? There's Irish communities all over the world, especially in the English-speaking countries. And I'm targeting my television series towards the United States, and there's 40 million Americans of Irish descent.
Okay.
And Irish music is something that most people have heard of one way or another. They have an idea of how it's supposed to sound. So I wanted to start with something that was on the accessible side.
Okay, a little bit more familiar.
And a little more accessible for me as well, because you go to Ireland, you can speak English.
Yeah.
Now, I was in some areas where they speak Irish. But everybody who speaks Irish there pretty much speaks English as well.
Because you could go to Morocco and speak French, but we know how your French.
Yeah, my French is
still
work in progress.
It's still work in progress.
So since it was my first film, my first time producing a film, I thought Ireland would be a good choice, and because it's music that people really like. I think it's the most popular folk music in the world. It's the most common, so you can hear it all over the world. In fact, I interviewed a guy named Niall Keegan, who's an amazing flute player and professor at the World Academy in Limerick, Ireland. And he said it's funny because he goes to Europe and he plays at folk festivals. And when everybody meets at the bar afterwards, people playing music from all over the world, English or French or Italian or whatever. And then they meet at the bar later and they play Irish music.
Okay. So it's sort of the connector between everybody.
Yeah, it's really, it's unreal, actually, how spread around it is.
So I want to go a little bit more to your also, basically you went from the U.S. to Israel, right?
I moved here 12 years ago.
12 years ago, so basically more or less the same time that I moved here.
Yeah?
2002, I think I moved here, so it's a little bit more.
Yeah.
But you're Jewish, Hoffman. You can't hide that but your connection basically to this place, did it come also from music, or was it just the Jewish roots?
It's all mixed together for me, but I came here when I was 15 with a bunch of high school kids, and to make a long story short, I just kind of fell in love with the place. Of course, the place back then was quite different, 1979.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the first places we went was Sinai.
Okay.
Before it was returned to the Egyptians, and there was very little down there.
Yeah.
It was just gorgeous, amazing. And I just, I can't explain it other than saying that I fell in love with the place, and I always wanted to live here. It took me 25 years to realize that dream, actually.
Wow.
There was always reasons I had why I couldn't leave, usually having to do with what other people wanted.
Yeah. But your music, basically, because I know you play in a lot of different bands here, and how, like, being a musician in Israel is definitely not an easy task, because there's there's no springboard. I think other places might have a bit more of that springboard out. Like you have successful musicians that have made it outside of Israel, from Israel, but it's sort of, when I got here, that was 2002, it sort of felt like a little bit like New York in the 60s, like everything was, you know, we'd play concerts in like old factories and just put a PA system and although the first album had some success, it didn't feel like you had some sort of system for music here. It's like everybody to themselves in a way, which in a way creates super talented people with not much of an outlet. So I've had in a way it's good for singer-songwriters because you get amazingly talented people that are happy to play on your albums. But it's also a limitation. You don't feel like, okay, if I do something good, it's going to be thrown out. Like our closest neighbors are not very receptive to Israeli music, so touring is kind of difficult. Can you tell a little bit more about the challenges of maybe getting your music heard or getting your music out here in Israel?
It's funny, most of the traveling I've done is it's been the last few years with a singer who's based in New York.
Okay.
Her name is Uta Lemper. She started a project. She's known as a cabaret singer and interpreter of the music from Weimar, Germany.
Nice.
She's an amazing singer and musician and composer. And she was born in Germany. She's lived in New York for the last 20 years or so. And she put together a program of music that was written in concentration camps during the Holocaust.
Wow.
And she found me on YouTube and thought I lived in New York, actually.
Wow.
And contacted me. And I said, well, a little further away. I'm one of the outer boroughs.
I just heard one really terrible but amazing story about the song Dance Me to the End of Love from Leonard Cohen, which was about basically musicians being forced to play their music outside of the gas chambers. And it was always like this haunting violin going, like one of the sentences is, dance me to your beauty with burning violin. Just sort of to wrap, you know, all of the violin to so many emotional triggers.
Well, you know, the violin has been, until say 50, 75 years ago, the violin was the Jewish instrument. As it's the Irish music, the Irish instrument,
Wow.
as it's the same in many other countries, but for Jewish, especially Ashkenazi culture, the violin is like, in a way, the voice of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And so it's always been really important in Jewish folklore and songs, stories.
I think we're basically almost running out of time here, and I want to get a little bit of that. Is it a klezmer piece that I want people to go? So we're going to do that as an outro. Thank you very, very much for this time. It's been an amazing, interesting, and a great learning experience to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
Thank you very much to Dini Golvais, who is our producer for today. Thank you very much to Dalia Arazi, who is the owner of Achdut Geula, who gives us this platform. Anything last that you want to add before we just run off into klezmer heaven?
Yeah, these are, you're going to see a video of, these are also a couple of tunes that I wrote. This one's called Jewish Luck Wedding Hora, and the next one is called Schnaps was Giben.
Schnaps was Giben. Sounds good. All right, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again next week.